Hey everyone, I'm just going to quickly run through my latest changes to my hybrid dash list, but then more importantly, we're going to run through the meta. We're going to run through a quick sideboard guide. I'm going to cover every single hero, I hope I didn't forget any. I think all of them are accounted for. So we'll quickly jump into any changes to the list. The main recent change was obviously the inclusion of Pulse Wave Harpoon. For Pulse Wave Harpoon, we cut Yellow Throttle. The main issue is that Yellow Throttle is just a little bit too awkward, only coming in for 5 vanilla, and then also costing 2, whereas Pulse Wave Harpoon is a 1 for a 4, with boost, which is fine on its own. The text is obviously absurd, and it's an incredibly powerful card, but if you can't even get the effect off, or the effect isn't that powerful, still having another 1 for 4 that blocks for 3 is really good. Also enables maximum velocity to be a little bit more effective. And then the other inclusion was BIOS Update. So BIOS Update is being slotted in for payload. I think that you have to cut a non-boost card for BIOS Update. If you cut a boost card, the ratio of boost cards is going to go down, which is an issue if you're going to be running maximum velocity and high octane. Also with Pulse Wave Harpoon, you can shut down all of these, so I decided to cut a non-boost card for it. Payload is okay. It's not that necessary for a lot of matchups. I think Payload is better in Blitz. I think BIOS Update is very strong in CC, especially if you're able to cut blues and then include blue items. The biggest issue with BIOS Update is it weakens your Dromai matchup because you're no longer running 3 Phantasm Poppers. So if Dromai is more popular, or if the card is really hindering the matchup, then I think I'd go back to the payloads and I would cut the BIOS Update. I'm still using the hybrid package, which is going to be a 60 card aggro deck, or in this case a 61 card aggro deck, and then having a transformative sideboard where I can flex into the pistol rig setup. A very powerful engine, has a very good late game. It's obviously much stronger than the aggro portion of the deck, but the issue is the damage you would take to set it up is sometimes not conducive depending on what matchup you're playing. So it's mostly here against more slow heroes, more grindy matchups. So the Guardians, Dromai, Dorinthia is also a big one, just because you can't race that deck. And if you try to race it, she can also just have full block and fatigue you. Whereas the pistol package of the deck also has so many D-reacts, so you're able to handle Dorinthia really well. So that's the main deck. It's mostly like 50-50 in most of the meta. You have some matchups that are a little bit worse, and some matchups that are a little bit more favored. But for the most part, pretty even playing field. If you're interested in learning more about the deck, or how the deck functions, I have plenty of videos on my channel that cover that, so I'm not really going to jump into the more micro things about the deck, but it's mostly here for the sideboard guide today. So we're going to jump into this and we're going to cross-reference with all of these heroes. So we're going to start with Azalea. And for Azalea, she's mostly a disruptive deck. She is a little bit aggressive for sure. She's kind of like a redline version of Lexi, if that makes sense. So you have a lot more aggressive cards in here, but it mostly is kind of like a tempo disruptive style deck. It's hard to really pinpoint what Azalea is. But you're gonna have a lot of like go again arrows. You're gonna have some disruptive on hits. You're gonna have some just good vanilla, or not vanilla, but generic decks. Like for instance, you have like E-Strike in here. You have Sigil, Sinks. You have that all you've got. The main issue with Azalea is consistency. She can't defend all that well. Although this version definitely has a lot more 3 blocks, and it also has the inclusion of the D-reacts. So this list can actually block a lot more than a typical Azalea list can, but only having 1 block on your chest, 1 block on your headpiece, and 2 block on your legs is a big downside. You can also just stumble on disruption. You can just draw a hand that doesn't have enough disruption. You can draw a hand of blanks, like a bunch of non-attacks, for instance. Like you can draw a hand that just has take aim, so you can destroy his rain razors, but you don't have an arrow. You can draw a hand that's all arrows, and then it gets kind of awkward because you don't really have any way to buff them, although Azalea's hero ability is very powerful, giving Dominate on top of a buff so you can buff, and then let's say put Red in the Ledger or Remorseless into your arsenal with Azalea, give it Dominate, and then that on hit's almost guaranteed to hit your opponent. Very toolbox style deck. Not exactly sure if it's better or worse than Lexi. I think not having the access to the ice card pool is a very big one. I think Lexi hedges it out for that reason alone. Also, Lexi's a little bit more consistent. But the question is, like, how do we beat it? You just hit it as hard as you can. That's basically it. You would prefer to go second here, and if she doesn't get a disruptive arrow with dominate that can hit you on turn 1, there's just like no way for her to really come back, because at that point you're presenting so much damage. Rangers need to keep multiple cards to be able to do anything as part of the issue with their class. They can't really keep like 1-card hands, although this list can a little bit more, like playing Ravenous Rabble. That's kind of it, because you need a buff, you need a card, you'd have to put it into Arsenal, so you'd need an additional card to pitch to Death Dealer, and then depending on how much the card costs, you would also need a pitch to play the card. So the issue is just that, like, if she needs to keep multiple cards, if she wants to keep up the disruption, if she wants to keep up the aggression. So if you just come out of the gate swinging, if you're going second, for instance, it's going to be so difficult for her to really keep up with that. Although I'm not really sure if this list can fatigue you. Having the 3 blocks, having the sinks and the sigils makes me a little bit wary about whether or not you want no changes to sideboard, or if you do want to start induction chamber. The assumption is that there's no changes to sideboard. You're starting Tekla Pounder. But I don't know. This is tough. I think against this list, I would maybe still say you want to go Tekla Pounder. It's actually very difficult for a list to fatigue you if you're not on induction chamber, just like a standard list that isn't like really taxed. And the biggest issue I think normally comes down to armor. It's how much like health they have in their armor, and only having 4 I just don't think is enough for her to fatigue you, relying on that as well. Also does have 2 blocks in here, so even if she sides out the non-blocks or the 3 blocks in here, still think maybe it is possible. No, I think she has to make a sacrifice somewhere. I think you're probably still fine just fully aggroing down this deck. I don't think they're going to try to like full block fatigue you. I don't think this deck has the capability of doing that. So I would just watch out for Red in the Ledger, Remorseless. If they're Seek and Destroy, you're fine, because you can fully play out your hands if you want to, unless if it's like max velocity and you literally can't play, it has to go in your arsenal. So as long as they don't like chain together and get very lucky on their disruptive effects, because a lot of these arrows are just kind of like raw damage. Drill Shot is kind of an issue, but it's mostly fine. But for the most part, like, you know, Sleep Dart isn't going to do anything. Fatigue Shot isn't that effective against you, because you can just play your weaker attacks first. So not too much of a concern there. Really, the only card that actually really hurts you is pretty much just Red in the Ledger, and they only have 3 of those. Although I suppose they could find a way they can like Memorial Ground it, but that's a non-block. It's a big hand they have to keep, and if you're coming with Combustible Courier and Pulse Safe Harpoon and stuff like that, they shouldn't be able to really do that. So should be a good matchup for you, but you know, things can change. Moving on to Boltyn, we're just gonna be signing in 1 induction chamber. Preferring to go first so they can't just get like free charges to soul on turn 1. But Boltyn, I mean, we're looking at Josh Law's list here, which is more of a combo deck using the Centauri Sabers. I know there is like a Raiden build out there, but this list is trying to get enough cards in soul to then go off of the Centauri Sabers, breaking Gallantry Gold, Courage of Blade Hold, and then playing multiple Lumina Ascensions, so they can just attack with their Sabers multiple times in 1 turn for free. They don't cost anything, and they're all buffed by the Lumina, and then they're also buffed by the Gallantry Gold. So it's kind of a combo deck that sets up charges to soul and then pops off with normally double Lumina. Sometimes you can hit triple Lumina, but that's pretty wild. I am a little bit concerned about fatigue against this list. They do only have access to 3 block on armor, so maybe you can go Tekla Pounder. I would maybe just include a induction chamber and then hope that you can spark it out on turn 1 if they do decide to do that, because they do have Soul Shield, they do have Sink Below, they do have a wide variety of 3 blocks, although there are some 2 blocks in the deck. But you know, being a warrior, they do have access to a lot of 3 blocks. I still think it's gonna be hard. I don't think that like any deck can fully block out dash if you know what's up and if you don't get super unlucky. Like, assuming that you don't start the game and immediately banish like 3 max velocities and 3 high octanes, like probably okay. You can probably slow down the game a lot. The new addition to the hybrid list I'm running now has 3 Tekla Pounders instead of 1. So you can actually stack those if you need to slow the game down and like really sort of pace yourself. If you can tell the opponent's just like full blocking every single turn to try and like run you out of threats, like you can slow the game down, set up, and then hit super hard, and they can never fully block you out. So I don't think that Boltyn can fatigue you, but yeah, I don't think it can fatigue you. All right, never mind. We're gonna make a quick adjustment here. You're not bringing an induction chamber. I'm just gonna go Pounder. And if they're, I guess the only consideration is you don't know if they're gonna be on Raiden, because if they're on Raiden, they're probably not gonna be as like hedging for the combo. It's difficult. I'm making the assumption people are gonna mostly be on Sabers. Sabers needs to keep lots of cards to do what it wants to do, so they just can't really afford to block with like more than 2 cards a turn, even sometimes like 1 card. This has less health on armor than Azalea. Although the 3 blocks, I mean, like Soul Shield sounds cool, but I mean, it is just trading 2 cards for 6 damage. So I mean, like, it's on rate. It's probably not too big of an issue. You're probably fine. I hope I'm not wrong here. I don't think I am. Just you're gonna be racing the combo. You're gonna try to deal more damage to them before they can set up the Luminous stuff. So probably want to go first. Hopefully you just get lucky and you can find a good arsenal target, or you can play like a pounder or something. You mostly just want to stop them from getting like more cards in soul than you can deal with. If they do go for the combo, you can normally like try to hedge blocking out some of the Centauri Sabers, although you're not gonna be able to do all of it. I'd probably save your armor for those combo turns, because sometimes you can block with a card, block with armor, block with the card, block with armor. Oh no, sorry. You would need to, assuming the Sabers get buffed up to 5, it gets difficult. It gets difficult, but you can prevent a lot of value during the combo turn if you just like save armor for that. So, but also the deck is a little bit weak because it's just like has consistency issues and like takes too long sometimes, and you have to keep a lot of cards. So if you can aggro them down fast enough, they don't have enough health on armor. Going into Bravo, it's just typical dash stuff. It's why you have the transformational sideboard. You're just gonna be bringing in all your pistol items. You're gonna be playing a very long grindy game. Bravo's endgame cannot beat yours, and the deck is not fast enough normally to stop you before you get there. Bravo has gotten a little bit more aggressive, as have the Oldhim list. You now have inclusions like Pulverize, Crush the Weak, Zealous, Boltyn, which has always been there, Pummels, but even things like Chokeslam are newer, are now more popular. And I think the Bravos started to understand that you can just like fully aggro down Dash before she can get all of her items out. And if you are successful, because you also do have things like Rouse, Thunderquake, Pulverize, you can like heave stuff and just like really hit them hard with Dominate. They do sometimes die before they can get the items out. That happened to me at the Calling in San Jose. Like I was 0-2 against Guardians for the Calling. It's actually very difficult, even with a list that was honestly more teched for Guardian than a lot of hybrid lists are. A lot of hybrid lists don't run all 9 D-Reacts, but I still run all 9 D-Reacts, but it's difficult because if they just like say no blocks every turn, just like dominate stuff, you just leak too much damage. You're going to be bringing in the entire sideboard package. You're going to be cutting Combustible Courier, you're not boosting. You're going to be cutting Max Velocity, you're not boosting. You can't boost, you have too many generics, and you also have your pistol items. If you boost a pistol item, you lose the game. The only time you're going to boost is very, very, very late game. When you played all your D-Reacts, you know your pitch stack, and you have all the items out, and you have to close out the game. That's it. You're going to be cutting Techno Pounders and Techno Cores. You probably did want to keep 2 Techno Cores just for the sake of blue count. Also, you can block out for 9 against a lot of the effects. Preserve your life total to play Techno Core and pass. And what the Techno Core means is that you can return with your pistols just by itself. Normally like 1 extra card, or more importantly, it lets you block with extra cards and still be able to play any of your items. So you can block with 3 cards and then use your Techno Core resources to play Induction Chamber or Plasma Purifier. Or you can block with 2 cards and then keep a blue Spark of Genius and then use your Techno Core to then use 2 cards to go tutor. So that's pretty important. T-Bone, you're just going to cut, not boosting. It's not super important. You're mostly playing a mid-range game until they start dominating stuff, but you're just trying to race to get the items out. Obviously, you're just going to go first so they can't dominate you on turn 1, and also so you can try to find the items as fast as possible. Something I will mention is that if they don't dominate something, you should be trying to block out. I would not be trying to trade damage. I would preserve life total as much as possible, unless if your hand has a pistol item and you need to play it, right? Because the biggest issue is going to be late game when you need to keep cards to set up the engine to go off, and then like if your life total is too low, you'll just never get there. Or you need to play your last item, but your life total is too low, and then you're not pressuring them, not taking cards. So preserve your life total. It's a resource against the Guardians. Be a little bit careful about fatigue, but you can win the game with just 4 cards left in deck if they're all blues. So it's not super important. Against Briar, we're just going to be starting Induction Chamber with Techno Pounder. They do have a better chance of fatiguing you due to the fact they can descend to 0 for 4, make an embodiment, and then block. And if they have 3 blocks, then they block above rate, because then they block for 4. That's basically it. They're basically like they're a full aggro deck, but they can like go a little bit more mid-rangey, or they can be a little bit more combo with the Channel Mount heroic stuff. They do have a lot of on-hits. I think that's the hardest thing for Dash, is like you're going to get presented with cards you do have to block, and they're on through your race phase, so yeah, times are tough out here. They can also run Smashing Good Time if they want, because it's a non-attack that has Go Again, so they can play it into like another non-attack with Go Again, so they can go like, you know, they can go Smashing Good Time into Bramble Spark, and then, you know, play something with Go Again because they have a Lightning Embodiment, and yeah, it's gonna be a rough time. It's gonna be a rough time. But if you're on Tekla Pounder, they can fatigue you. Normally, it is hard, but with the embodiments, it does become a little bit more tricky. So I don't really know what to make of the matchup. I think if you go second, you can aggro them pretty hard. Although I think you may want to go first because they can just set up some absolutely gnarly 5-card hands. Like if they go turn 1 and they get Channel, and then they arsenal like, you know, E-Strike or Bramble Spark or any of this stuff, right? You know, they arsenal like Sonata, Force of Nature. They can even like play 2 non-attacks and just pass turn and make a Lightning Embodiment on turn 1. They can Pitch to Grass, make a Rune Chant. You can just get absolutely hosed going second. But going second also has merit because since they're an aggro deck, if they come out of the gate on turn 2, you can get pressured really quickly. And if they present a disruptive on-hit like Command and Conquer or Race Face, you're also kind of screwed. So it's tough. She's a good deck. She's previously been like super favored in a dash. It's only because of the recent additions like Pulse Wave Harpoon and stuff that like you do have a better chance. Pulse Wave Harpoon really does hurt Briar. But it's going to be difficult. I wouldn't say you're necessarily favored in that matchup. I'd probably say you're slightly disfavored. But I would just go Induction Chambers to hedge if they decide to try full blocking you. They do have a lot of blocking and power on equipment because they have Crown, they have Grasp, and they have, they can run Iron Weave or Tunic. So we're talking 5, we're talking like 6 block on armor, which is a lot. Mostly I would just watch out for any of the disruptive on hits. I would try to set up Pulse Wave Harpoon. You're obviously going to try to rip things like Channel Mount. You're going to try to rip, they need to keep a lot of cards to be able to go off because they need to turn on Rosetta Thorn, so they need to have a mix of their non-attack, their attack, their pitch card as well. So if you're able to disrupt them pretty hard with Pulse Wave Harpoon, you're in a good spot. But they just have so many on hits. Like they're going to have Snatch, they're going to have Force of Nature, CMH, Coax, Erase Face. You're not going to have a good time, that's for sure. But they are Rune Blades, so they are prone to variance, right? They can draw 4 attacks, and then they all block for like 2 or whatever, so they can't really, defend with them, but they don't really have a way to get Go Again on them for their turn, or they can draw 4 non-attacks and just blank on their hand. But they have Earth Embodiment, so the 4 non-attacks are like reasonable. Against Dash, it's oddly enough, for someone who plays mostly Dash, I haven't really figured out the mirror. It's difficult. It's kind of like it's like an innovation on like the Prisoner's Dilemma, where like you gotta make a decision that like hedges against the other ones in the best way possible. And I've kind of discovered that going mid-range, I think, in my opinion, is the best way. Because if you're on full aggro and they're on Control Dash, like the hardcore Fatigue one that plays mostly like generics and like a bunch of D-React, Sigil, Oasis, then they'll obviously fatigue you. You have no way of going through that. If you're on full control, with D-Reacts and stuff like that, I think it's a little bit better. So honestly, I'd maybe even consider bringing in the D-Reacts here. If they're on control, you need to have the pistol on them so you can contest with their endgame. Their endgame's gonna be better because normally they run 5 to 6 items, so you're probably gonna lose, unfortunately, unless if you get them really early. If they're on mid-range, you obviously need the pistol items to contest their mid-range plan as well. If they're on the aggro list, then you can try to full block and fatigue it unless they're on Hanabi, and then it's going to get a little bit more difficult because the overpower can sometimes be a form of pseudo dominate, and it is a little bit evasive. But just for that, I don't know. This one's the biggest work in progress. Of all of these, I feel pretty confident. This one's the one I don't feel confident in. So if you have experience with the mirror, so I don't have as much experience with the mirror, and you want to tell me what you're doing for it, that would be appreciated, because this is the only one that I don't know. I don't know if you're supposed to bring in D-Reacts or not. They're very good for value, and I think that helps against all 3 versions of Dash you could play against. You could play against the Hyper Aggro, the Hybrid style. You can play against mid-range Dash, which is the boomer list, basically. Back in the day when you used to run Tome and Command and Conquer is your 6 generics in your deck, and everything else is mech stuff. Sometimes you run D-Reacts, and then there's the hardcore Viandal's Fighting Spirit, Springboard, Somersault, Sigil of Solace, Dash. That's some other stuff, right? So I don't really know. I haven't really figured out the best way to have a tight sideboard plan that covers all that matchup. So right now we're just experimenting with just putting in the pistols and then seeing what happens. Dorinthia is a knowledge check deck. Once you know how it works, it's not is surprising. When you first play against it, you feel like it's S tier. It's like tier 0. You have absolutely like no way to beat it until you figure out how it works, and then like it feels like a gimmick deck. Their biggest thing is mostly going to be stacking Dawnblade. You really have to watch out for glistening. You're obviously going to want to watch out for Steelblade Supremacy turns. Whenever you see those cards, you're on high alert. You're going to be full blocking the best you can. The way that I like to play it, I also don't know, this has to be a mistake. I don't know why there's a Rising Aetherus in here. That's probably a Razor. I have no idea. The way I play is I go pistols. The main reason why is because we go aggro. They're going to punish you really hard for not blocking because they're going to stack Dawnblade counters, and then eventually their damage is going to outpace yours. And also, this entire deck blocks for 3. They have 3 life here, 3 life here. These both block for 2 and then 1, so 6, 8, 9. 9 health on armor is huge. I think Warrior has some of the best blocking equipment in the game in terms of life. There's no way you're not going to fatigue against this deck. If they commit to full blocking you, even on like D-reacts and stuff like that, all their cards block 3 in their class. It's gonna be rough. So you can't boost into them. So you do have to go with the controlling plan. It actually oddly works better for you. The main reason why is because all your cards block for 3. And blocking for 3 is really good against Dorinthia because a lot of her breakpoints come in, most of her buffs come in 3, right? So Dawnblade is for 3. Her buffs add, if we look at Iron Song Response, +3. Razor Reflex is +3. For Blood is +3. We can go down the list here. Sharpened Steel is +3. Warrior's Valor Red is +3. Route is +3, but also removes a card. So the thing is that most of the time, like, you're gonna want to block for 9, block for 6, or block for 9, depending on how many cards are in their hand. And you don't get screwed on awkward breakpoints that way. Like if you can only block 8 and you need to block 9, then they get their Dawnblade hit, and then they can get a counter. They can swing again. You can just cleanly block with 3 cards. And what you do is you block, you preserve your life total, you slowly get out your pistol items, and then you're grinding out the game. They're not going to be blocking your pistol very often because they block with cards and their turns get significantly weaker, just because they also run out of combat tricks. But the biggest thing is once you get the items out and you get like high octane or whatever, you can start pivoting where you just start saying no blocks every turn. Most of my experiences, I literally just full block Dorinthia until I get all the items out, and at that point, they're normally around 30 life because I sometimes just get to keep 1 card and I send 4 because I go pistol, induction, pistol. So one card blue for 4 is really good, above rate. Normally they'll be at like 30, sometimes less, and I'll normally still be almost at 40 life. Sometimes if it's like Warrior's Valor or something, I'll let the first one hit and then I'll block the second one so it doesn't have the +3 effect. So the thing is that at that point my life total is so high. If you say no blocks, they lose all their reprise triggers, right? So a lot of their cards become a lot weaker. Some stuff like Stroke of Foresight and Out for Blood still get the bump effects, but like Overpower gets weaker, Route gets weaker. They can't even trigger Singing Steelblade till we go find the tutor. Glint doesn't draw them a card. So there are turns where you actually say no blocks, assuming Dawnblade doesn't have a counter. Assuming it's not like a Glistening turn or a Steelblade Supremacy turn. Normally they actually don't do a whole lot. So what you'll do is like, you'll get the items out, and then you'll start saying no blocks, and then they don't do any damage, and then you send 12 every turn, which is going to be way better than whatever they're doing. And eventually they're just going to lose the game. And if you do it after you Arsenal High Octane, then you're doing like 25 to 30 damage, and they're probably just dead at that point. And there's no way that they can really stop you. They don't have enough aggression, and they can't go wide enough either. And if you're able just to block 9 and stop their first attack every turn, they're never leaking damage on you, so they can't really stop you from setting up. You're going to take out your items that don't block or anything because you really do need to preserve that. Tekla Core is important though because you can block 9, play a Tekla Core, block 9, play a pistol item, and then like continue like that. That's pretty important. You're normally going to get left with 1 card in hand a turn, but it is a liability. I'd prefer not to have in the matchup if I could, but you only cut so many things. And you're basically going to play this like a Guardian matchup almost. Preserve life, but obviously a lot different. But I would really study the Dorinthia card pool. I would learn what their cards do. That way you're not really surprised by anything and you kind of know how to block appropriately. Once you know how to do that, the deck is not that difficult to deal with. You're going to go first, so this is the only point of contention. They really like going second, because if they go first and you just block 12, their turn's over. The only thing I'll say is that you really do need to find the pistol items, and if you go second and you draw items, and they decide to attack you for some reason, sometimes you can actually like get hosed really quickly. Also, if you go first, you're able to arsenal a D-react sometimes, which is pretty important. So it makes their second turn a little bit weaker. I think you're fine either way. I don't think there's a correct choice. But I think it just goes to show that you're probably kind of comfortable in the matchup because like you're probably going first or second. There's merit to both of them. So moving on to Dromai. A lot of people consider Dromai to be like a dash counter, and they think it's a really difficult matchup. I have not felt that way. I felt like the matchup is skill intensive, which is maybe what people mean by difficult because they don't have enough reps on either dash or the matchup to really know what they're doing. But I don't really have issues with this matchup. It's tight, it's close, things can go well for both sides of the table, but I absolutely wouldn't call this a counter or anything like that. So very similar to your deck. They're trying to set up a board state for more of a mid-range value deck. They're trying to get to an end game that's very powerful, but the only issue is that their permanents are temporary. As long as you can attack the dragons, they can lose their board state, which is something that they can't do to you unless if they're running like Imperial Warhorn or something. But you obviously can't boost into them because they can fatigue you, and also if you try to race a Dromai and they're playing dragons, then eventually their board state just outvalues yours every turn. And then when you're eventually forced to attack dragons because their board state's out of control, you just lose at that point. So you're going to be going for kind of a mix. The way I like to play it is I just cut these and I bring in the pistol items. And the way I play the matchup is I'm going full control pistol. The school of thought that I like burn into my brain, I don't deviate from, is it's always incorrect to let them keep a dragon for a turn. Even if it's like Rake the Embers. If they make an Ashwing and I let them go into their next turn with the Ashwing, that's an incorrect play most of the time. Because the dragons on one turn cycle are normally not that good. They're quite powerful because Azalea is going to attack for 2, attack for 1 arcane. This is a 0 cost, by the way. So 1 card that attacks for 3, and then you have to deal 3 damage to it. So it's a 0 for 6, if that makes sense. You go to Dromai attacks for 3, and you deal 2 to it, so it's a 0 for 5. So these cards kind of seem absurd. They seem above rate. Obviously, there's a downside. They need to be generating ash to play these cards, and that requires them to also keep extra cards to be doing stuff. But the cards are really good. But think about Azalea, for example, if you let it live for 2 turns. If you let it live for 2 turns, it deals 3 twice, instead of deal 3 back to it. So now that's 0 for 9. Way worse than 0 for 6, right? You let it stay for an extra turn, it's 0 for 12. So the dragons on 1 turn cycle are okay, but the dragons that they stay on for multiple turns are huge. They're very big problems, and they're gonna drown you in value. The issue is that it's like invisible, right? Because you just see the dragon, you see the health, you have to deal to it. You don't really process that this thing has attacked you 3 times. Even like Rake is really good, because if they make 3 Ashwings, they attack with them, and then you don't kill the Ashwings and they have a go again starter, and they do this like, let's say like 4 times. They have dealt 12 damage, and then even if you're on a pistol, you're overkilling the dragons every time, so the value exchange is even worse for you, and it's very difficult to kill 3. So just for that reason, just like don't let dragons live longer than 1 turn. The only reason you shouldn't be killing a dragon is because like you just don't have enough action points. I wouldn't boost into things like Ashwings. However, the way I play the matchup, the reason why I don't bring in the D-reacts is because I want to be able to boost if their board state is starting to get out of control. So if they keep a 5-card hand and they play a bunch of 0-cost dragons, they stack like Azalea or Dromai or whatever, or like Viserai, I need to be able to like pistol out their dragons and then also to clear additional things, right? So normally that means I have to boost. So that's the only time I'm boosting in the deck. BIOS update just make it a little bit easier because you can sort of mitigate like accidentally losing your pistol items, but the other thing too is Combustible Courier is very good in this matchup because you can hit a dragon, boost into another one, it gets a +3, so you can normally wipe their board out pretty easily that way. Keep a blue, pistol out their dragons. I would prioritize getting your induction chambers over your purifiers, although, you know, purifier does make it easier to kill things like Necria or Yenderai or Uvia. I just prefer to have the induction chamber. I need to be able to go wide. That's mainly the issues. They go wider than you have action points, especially like induction chambers, so they can win if their board state gets out of control. So you need to be able to boost to shut down their board state. They don't have an end game like yours, and they can actually fatigue because they can just run out of dragon invokes, and as long as you're on the pistol plan, your end game is going to be spectacular. So as long as you're controlling the board state, it should never be an issue. Also, a lot of lists these days are running Mage Master Boots instead of Phantasmal Footsteps, so if you boost a pistol on him, you're normally like okay, because you normally can just deal damage to them anyway. You don't really have to worry about footsteps like mitigating a bunch of their life total. Know your fab math, know your Michael Hamilton math. It's gonna come very in handy in this matchup. It's very value based. Things can go well for both sides. You can high roll your items. The Dromai can high roll their best, board states possible. But just don't let dragons live. Just kill them every turn. Don't attack them. Attack their dragons. The only reason you should be attacking Dromai is if they don't have dragons on the table. Vi is like the premier aggro deck in my opinion. It's probably the best aggro deck to be on. The raw damage is outmatched. It can't brick the way that Briar can. Art of War is absurd and pretty much allows you to have like 25 plus damage turns really consistently without doing a whole lot. Mask of Momentum is really strong, but also Mask of the Pouncing Lynx is nuts. Often is between 5 and 7 value on a piece of equipment, which is huge. The deck is very good. I would say it's probably one of the decks like to beat, if that makes sense. Like if you don't have a plan for Fine, you don't have a plan for like Iyslander, you probably should reevaluate your deck. But I don't really know if they can fatigue you, so I'm comfortable with starting Tekla Pounder and racing them. They just have such a high density of 2 blocks, although their armor can make up for that because they do have 3 block on Furnace. They can block with Tunic and Mask. So they do have a decent amount of life that way. They have, 6 life on armor? But I think the density of 2 blocks is just too much. Even if they side out their non-blocks and they want to try to block you out, I think if you're just smart about it, and you just be patient and you set up like Pounder or Max Velocity or High Octane, there's just no way for them to stop you. So the question is, if they're going to be on aggro, what are you doing? So I would prefer to go second. You need to pressure the life total immediately. And if you go second, then things like Mask Momentum aren't as going to be effective into you. They do decide to go Mask Momentum if they're going second. I would normally wait till the 3rd attack. I know like previously, like in the ninjas, you block the 2nd attack because the 3rd attack's normally on a breakpoint, but Fi doesn't have that many breakpoints outside of Blaze Headlong. And maybe Snatch, but Snatch can be full blocking anyway. Maybe Mounting Anger, but it's tough. A lot of their attacks are going to be coming in for 3 or less, so you don't really need to block prior to the Mask Momentum trigger being threatened. You should just block when it's threatened. And you'll probably be able to do okay because you have a bunch of cards that block for 3. The way I normally view the matchup is I can beat Fi if I draw Combustible Core before my Tekla Pounder is gone. Because if I can buff it with Goliath Gauntlet up to 8, there's almost no way for them to block that, and it's just too heavy of a tempo hit. However, Fi, of course, can draw Art of War and just completely blow you out. So it's 50-50. It's difficult because either side can high roll the other. Although, like, consistently, I think Fi is going to be a little bit better edge just because the deck is very strong. Although your Pulse Wave Harpoon can really wreck it if you can, like, take things like Lava Burst or the Draconic Starter. Very powerful. Alright, moving on to Iyslander. Probably, like, one of the best decks, I would say, in the format currently. At least it's up there. I know the playing field's a little bit even, but Iyslander is definitely probably in contention. This is the more recent list. It's pretty close to Michael Hamilton's list at One World. So the biggest difference now is instead of a few of the higher damage arcane damage spells, so things like Red Ice Bolt or Freezing Point, there's now the inclusion of Fighting Spirit and Wounded Bull. This actually does make your life a little bit easier because you're able to block with cards. Since your cards block for 3, you can block with reds. You use blues to prevent arcane damage and normally come out ahead. I would actually say you're pretty favorable into Iyslander, not to a high degree because they can just high roll you with Insidious Chill and Ice Veins if they can chain those together, and if they get the hypos at the right time, if they get the channel like fridges at the right time, you're gonna feel like you're not even playing the game. It's just how Iyslander is. But on the whole, you're probably gonna be doing pretty well under. You just present too much raw damage, and you also go tall as well with things like Throttle. A lot of your 1-for-5s, 1-for-4s. Even if they shut down your turn with hypo or CLF, they still have a threat they have to block. And now these Iyslander lists normally don't want to block with more than 1 card because they need to keep 2 cards to send back E-Strike, Fighting Spirit, Wounded Bull, and still be able to Arsenal. So you're going to start pressuring their life total really quickly. Although Hypothermia just absolutely sucks against you because all of your cards have conditional go again because of the boost mechanics, so Hypothermia will always time walk you. Although High Octane can stop this, and your Achilles accelerators can give you 1 more action point to get through it, although like I normally would save those till you have lethal. It's because you need that AB1 and you can't use them too early. Present your biggest attack first, always. Don't give them like a whole lot of prio windows before you attack. I would probably not give them any. This is too easy for them to shut out your turn if you're not careful. I don't think that Iyslander can fatigue you, although I have heard some people are trying to. I included 2 induction chambers here. This probably isn't correct. I think you would just run 1. I would run 1 and then I would start it, but I wouldn't start Tekla Pounder. The main reason why is because you want the blue in the deck to up your blue count. I'd rather have the blue Tekla Pounder in the deck and then have to tutor it or play it, rather than the opposite, where I have a red in the deck, because then if I have to pitch it for some reason, or I need it for resources, or to pay for AB, it's just way worse. I'd have the Tekla Pounder in the deck, but I would start Induction Chamber. And that honestly should be enough to get through their game plan. If they're stacking Ice Veins, Amulets in the city, if they get like that good high roll, I wouldn't try to pressure a whole lot of damage. I would maybe just like send 1 small attack and try to preserve life as much as possible. Just like pay for it, pitch out. Don't try to like get greedy on the Ice Vein triggers and like only pay 1 and then use the 2 to pay the other 2. Unless if you're like really in the driver's seat and your falling hand is gonna be nuts. Just because like you're gonna redraw the cards anyway. And once they lose like the Insidious Chill, once that goes away, they kind of just lose a lot of their disruption against you. So if you just preserve life total, they don't really, like, they can't really do much after that. So if I notice that the Iyslander is like high rolling me really hard, I don't think I'm really gonna have like full turns. I just like choose to preserve life total and just like pay out, basically. So that's how I kind of play the matchup, and then like hitting as hard as I can when the Iyslander trips up on disruption, like maximizing the damage is really big. You might be interested why I'm only cutting 1 max velocity. You're never going to resolve this card against Iyslander, you should never arsenal it. The only reason why it's here is just because it blocks 3 into the Wounded Bull effects and like E-Strike, and depending on whether or not they're on CNC, they're usually not, but E-Strike, Fighting Spirit, Scar for Scar, Wounded Bull, they're just good value because they can block for 3. The one last thing I'll mention is whether I should go first or second. If you go second, there is an issue where they can get really good disruption arsenal turn 1 against you. However, I think the tempo that they can get going second and having like a fused Ice Vein or something is just too much, in my opinion. So that's why I normally like to go second, because then you also pressure them immediately, and if they want to keep cards to send like Wounded Bull or Fighting Spirit back at you, then they have to like take a bunch of damage out of the gate, which I would prefer in the matchup over, you know, going first, trying to like get an arsenal, and then they just come out with like Ice Vein on turn 2, or they send Fighting Spirit on turn 2, Wounded Bull on turn 2, and now I'm actually pressured. I think that's a lot worse. Moving on to Kano. Kano is pretty much just a combo deck at this point. Really relies on the Ragamuffins, Stormstriders combo using Blazing Aether, Lessons in Lava, and Aether Wildfire. So I forgot the actual number. This may be off. I'm pretty sure the normal combo is about 27 damage. So I wouldn't let yourself go within that life total threshold if you can. You're mostly going to be trying to pressure the deck as hard as you can. And part of the playstyle is going to be just ripping cards in the Kano and then just dealing damage. There's no other way for me to put it. It's a pretty simple matchup. Mostly I would pay into AB to stop some of the on hits. So for instance, cards like Sonic Boom, it's important to shut down. Obviously things like Lessons in Lava. If they go for the combo, you obviously need to have resources available. Try to keep yourself above that life total threshold. So try to keep yourself above 30 if you can. It's very difficult because Kano only has 30 life and only has 1 block and equipment. So he can't really take damage to really start setting up without also falling into lethal range very quickly, especially because your deck also just presents too much damage too fast. It's just a raw damage check to 30. You just have a bunch of vanilla attacks with Go again. And with Tekla Pounder, you're going to have +6 for the first 3 turns, which is normally how long it takes for him to get the Tunic counter to set up the Blazing Aether, usually with an E-Pot, something like that. So by the time he would want to go for the combo, you normally are presenting lethal anyway, unless if he just like high rolls or if you low roll. So the matchup feels really favorable for you, but you know, things can go wrong and he can high roll above 27, for instance. So gotta be careful, but I would just like wait to pay for any of the important effects or to keep yourself above like 30 life. Moving on to Katsu, I think you're fine having no changes. You could run Induction Chamber, although I'm not really sure if they can like actively fatigue you. They are going to have some block on equipment, but I don't think it's enough, and they do have a lot of 2 blocks in the deck. Although things like Flick Flack and Sink Below can obviously be brought in the matchup, and that can cause some issues, but I think we're mostly going to be evaluating this as a aggro race plan, although they can go a little bit more mid-range, and if they're on things like a race, it does get pretty tricky. Mostly they're going to be relying on setting up they're bigger, higher ceiling turns. They're gonna have like a mix of off turns into bigger turns. So biggest one's gonna be going with the Surging into Whelming into Mugenshi, and then ending with Lord of Wind. It's like the main Katsu combo. Throughout this combo, you may be incentivized to block because of Katsu's ability, letting them tutor for the combo card to continue it. I normally would not block the Surging because it doesn't really have any actual on-hit itself. I would probably wait to block the Whelming Gust Wave because that's the one that actually lets them draw a card. So even if they Surging and they go get to tutor the Whelming Gust Wave off of Katsu, as long as you can block this out, you prevent the card draw, and then if you can still block out this if they naturally drew it in hand as well, or if they arsenaled it or whatever, then you shut down the combo, so you should be okay. Also, having a lot of 3 blocks means that when they do go for the combo turns, you're probably going to be fine. And if you're able to go second, I think you're really favored in the matchup. You're just going to present too much damage, and they don't have enough like defensive capabilities like on equipment, so they're going to have to be forced to block with cards from hand. And they do have a lot of 2 blocks in here. And so because of that, like if you don't give them like 4 to 5 card hands, like they're not going to be able to set up the really big turns as well. They really need to keep a high density of cards to do it. Also because they also need to be able to discard a Katsu. Kodachis are really good going second. So if you can, I would prefer to go second, mostly because if you just give them the tempo of presenting too many on hits for you to deal with through mass momentum triggers, through Katsu triggers, through any of the combo hits like take the tempo, Whelming Gust Wave, you're going to fall behind pretty quickly. But as long as you can draw like really good raw damage, you can probably outrace them. Levia, I'm not too familiar with. I have tested a little bit into the deck. I'm not sure if you're supposed to go fully into the pistol control package or if you're supposed to go for a more aggressive version. I think both of them have merit. The upside to going aggressive is that Levia can't stack really good recursion against you, because I know if they're teched for certain recursion packages, specifically using like Howl from Beyond, they can eventually just sort of like beat decks. They're trying to be fully defensive and trying to fatigue them and make them die to blood debt. They have ways to deal with that. And if you're fully aggressive and you get them in a spot where they have to start blocking with cards, so they have to block with cards and they can't turn on blood debt because you're forced to block, you just hit them and they die anyway. So aggro can be really good. The only downside is there may be a chance they can fatigue you, mostly because they have Carrion Husk. Carrion Husk is really big, having Scavskin Leathers as well. They also just have a lot of 3 blocks. So I'm not entirely sure Levia can like fatigue you if she commits. I know Rhinar can, so maybe in a similar sort of thing, especially since they have 6 block on Carrion Husk. So for that reason, I would start Induction Chamber. I'm not exactly sure if they're going to be moving into Arc Smash or not yet, but 1 Induction Chamber should be enough. I would say 1 Induction Chamber is enough to beat decks that are trying to fatigue you that aren't like hardcore Guardians, basically, or like Warrior. 1 Induction Chamber is more than you need, because she just has no way to block wide. So as long as you're presenting 2 Combat Chain Links, in addition to all the other cards you're boosting, she doesn't really have a way to stop that. But I would be careful in this matchup. She's going to have really good value plays. I don't really know if you're going to fully want to play for value. I think you can just race it and probably come out ahead. It's going to come down to how high she rolls you with like Blood Rush Spell and Art of War. But if that doesn't happen, you're probably fine. The deck has really bad consistency issues. It dies to itself. I wouldn't be too concerned about this. I haven't practiced a whole lot. That's just because I don't think it's going to be very like prevalent in a competitive meta sort of sense. But I'd still familiarize yourself with the deck list, just so there's no surprises. Moving on to Lexi. I think Lexi is actually a pretty tough matchup for Dash. If you go with the pistol control version, they invalidate a lot of your defense reactions by flipping an ice card from Arsenal to their hero ability. If they do that, then your unmovable costs 4, your D-reacts cost 1, like Syncla and Fate Foreseen. So your entire control package gets invalidated. So that is an issue. And if they also do go for the really big 3 of a kind into Rain Razors or Art of War turns, although this list does not run Art of War, and you have a pistol item in hand, you're going to take too much damage and you'll be forced to discard it anyway, or you'll get too many Frostbites and you won't be able to play it, and it's going to send your arsenal for the rest of the game. So I'd prefer to go aggro into them, but going aggro is also an issue too, because this deck is always kind of been teched to beat aggro through, you know, flipping Arctic Incarceration and then playing it to give you 4 Frostbites, Blizzard Bolt giving you Frostbite with every single arrow on hit, you have Chilling Ice that makes you pay or discard a card. You even have like CNC, this list is on Insidious Chill, Winter's Bite, Weave Ice. It's gonna be hard. Even things like Frostlock can shut you out. This deck's always been tech to beat aggro. However, it can't block very well and does have some consistency issues. So I'd prefer to go second. So because if they go second and they present, you know, an on hit, then obviously that's way worse going second, and you just kind of lose all tempo from there. If you go second and you hit them really hard, normally with like something like Combustible Courier, you probably just win the matchup. If you can go second, it really feels good in your favor. But you know, it can go either way. The only thing I will say is that because of the density of blue pitches in your deck, you have a really high blue ratio and a very low cost curve. And you also have Tekla Foundry Heart. Sometimes the Frostbites don't affect you as much as they affect other aggro decks like Briar or Fi. Some of the other on-hits are really punishing. I would just make sure that you know when you need to block out. I would really pay attention to the value of your hand. Whether or not you're going first or second in the matchup probably matters with like what your play style should be. But you should be okay. I mean, it's just going to be difficult. You're just going to hope that they don't high roll you with Disruption and that you can draw your good aggressive cards early. So like your reds, your Combustible Couriers. If you can hit that, then you're probably okay in the matchup. Since the pivot to the Rain Razors, Art of War variants are now running the Boltyn shots. I think this is pretty much after Pro Tour Lil with Yuki Lee Bender's list. There's less disruptive effects, although this list is on Hypothermia and Insidious Chill, which is going to make your life miserable. Also know there are some lists that run 9 Winter's Bite, so depends on how hard they're teching to be aggro. But those also are cards that don't deal damage, so if that's the case, you can just block out with what few arrows they present and you're probably okay. You just wait for them to have a hand where they just trip up on it. It's normally the Ranger problem is consistency. You just wait till they get a hand that doesn't have it, you know, they don't draw the nuts, and you're probably okay. Moving on to Oldhim, very similar to Bravo, although Oldhim does have more tools to beat you. Bravo has more aggression, but Oldhim has more utility. So some of the things that Oldhim has that Bravo doesn't is obviously Rampart plus Crown. Rampart plus Crown is a really good way to block pistols early game until you start getting items out. When you pistol for 2 and then 2, they can Crown Rampart to block 2 and then repay into Rampart since you close the chain to reload the pistol. When you go to attack again, they can pay another resource in the Rampart since they have 1 floating naturally. Rampart gets buffed up to 2 defense and they take 0 damage. You also have things like Channel Lake Frigid that tax you every time you load a counter and remove a counter on your items. They can run Blizzard, they can run Endless Winter, which gives you a Frostbite every time you activate your pistol or items to put a counter or unload a counter. They can also be very aggressive with things like Glacial, E-Strike, CNC plus Pummel, and trust me, the Oldhims are on Pummels and a lot these days. Spinal Crush, Terra Center, Rousey, Ancients, Zealous Belting, Thunderquake, they're aggressive now. They're no longer fatigueless. They're going to be trying to basically kill you first cycle, which is similar to what Bravo's doing. But even things like Hypothermia, if they're playing Hypothermia, absolutely shut down your deck because if they play Hypothermia, you can't give go again to your pistol. So if they pitch stack it for late game when you have all the pistol items out, they can just invalidate your turn. You don't get to do anything, and then they just hit you with like a really big disruptive attack. And at that point, your life total is really low because you've been taking damage to set up the items, so you're probably just dead. In this matchup, I would really try to be aggressive with your D-Reacts and be really proactive with your life total. If you let D-Reacts sit too long, they're open to things like CNC plus Tunic counter to Pummel. And if that happens, then you just fall way too far behind. So I would try to be more aggressive with your D-Reacts. If they ever play something without Dominate, just full block it. Even if it's better value to be attacking with it, your life total is the resource in this matchup, because you need to be able to take damage on the turns where you play your pistol items, and you also need to be able to take damage on the turns where you have to keep cards to use your pistol items late game. Eventually late game, you will get over the Rampart and Crown and eventually beat them. Your end game is better than theirs, and you don't run out of cards because you're just pitching to use your weapon, and your weapon is much better than their whale. So as long as you preserve your life total early game and they don't get super good hands with really good disruption and really good damage, then you're probably okay. It is starting to lean a little bit out of favor for you because the aggro packages are making their way into the main board, and even the sideboards sometimes have more aggression anyway. But it's tougher now than it was in the past, but it's still, you know, very reasonable. One really big thing you can do in this matchup is play around Rampart. And it's why you still want to run cards. Your 1-cost cards, so things like Zipper Hit, High Speed Impact, even Pulse Wave Harpoon. You're not going to be boosting them because you can't boost in this matchup. But what you can do is you can pistol and then give it go again with the Induction Chamber, and they're going to use Crown and Rampart because they're going to expect to get 2 more block out of the Rampart, paying the last resource. And with the go again without closing the chain, if you just pitch a blue. So you can keep a 2-card hand with a blue and let's say high speed impact, right? You pitch the blue, you put a counter on pistol, you put a counter on your induction chamber, pistol go again, you have 1 left floating, and they're gonna have Rampart locked on chain 1, and they're gonna be ready to pay 1 to pay back into it, and you're just gonna use your last resource and you're gonna throw your high speed impacts for 4, right? So you're denying the 2 value out of their Rampart, and now they have to commit another card to block, and then they're still gonna leak 1, or they just don't block with anything because they want to be able to keep proactive aggression against you, and then you just deal them 4 damage, which is a really good exchange. You can do that with Pulse Wave Harpoon, you can do that with any of your zipper hits, you can do that with Throttle if you have 2 cards, or if you have carried over a counter from a previous turn. In my opinion, the way you play the early game, and then you block with the rest of your cards, and then you just have the pistol items from there. Obviously, you prefer to go first, try to find them as fast as possible. What else? You cut your Tekla Pounders. Core is still good, so you can block with 3 cards for 9 on some of the Guardian attacks, so like Choke Slam. You can overblock Command and Conquer. You can block out Crush the Weak, Glacial if it's not fused, E-Strike, Spinal. You can block out Zealous Belting plus Whale. And then you can just play Tackle Core and pass, and then it gives you more flexibility to be able to keep 1 card to play Pistol Item, or keep 2 cards with Spark to go Tutor. So I like in the Guardian matchups for that reason. You are keeping in 2 High Octane just because sometimes they are on Hypothermia. In late game, you can actually play around the Hypothermia pretty well, since you'll still have Achilles, so you can High Octane, boost like once or twice, Pistol, and then Achilles and Pistol again. And if they're like playing Hypo and passing at a very low life total, then normally you just rip their entire hand, and once they lose their arsenal to Crown, once you're able to like basically strip their whole hand and they can no longer arsenal use Crown of Seeds, then you probably just win at that point. Your late game is like pretty consistent against them. Eventually you're going to get to a point where they're going to be full blocking every single pistol shot, and you can either fatigue them that way, or you can just filter in 1 to 2 boost cards. So once you run through your entire deck, you're at a D-Reacts, you know your pitch stack, the items are out, all of your stuff's loaded, and you have 4 cards, you can just use your 2 blues to pitch, and then just like throw in like Red Zipper Hit, Pulse Wave Harpoon, any boost card even. It can even be like a yellow or a blue, and it's just enough damage that they can't cover it, plus a pistol, so they just die. Against Rhinar, I would say Rhinar is probably actually like your toughest matchup. The main reason why is because they can fatigue you really easily, and they're not hindered by running a race phase in a matchup, so they don't need it. It's very easy card to move to the sideboard, or they just keep it as a card that they use to their discard fodder. So it's probably like the best deck for a race phase in my opinion. They also can run Pummel with CNC. They have very good 3 blocks. They can even run that all you got. They run D-Reacts even with, for instance, Reckless Swing. They do have pretty good blocking on their equipment because they can run Skull Crushers, Scab Skins, Crown, and Tunic. So it's very difficult for you to push through them if they decide to hardcore fatigue you. I remember back in the day when I was playing Rhinar, I could fatigue Chain comfortably on this deck. So if you can fatigue Chain with Rhinar, you can definitely fatigue Dash, because they do not have Ursa. And then also if you try to race them, they can just high roll you with Blood Rush Bellows, they can play Race Phase, CNC, Pummel, they have really good disruption. And another issue is that they're also running Arc Smash now. This list is not running Arc Smash, but I have seen lists that now tech Arc Smash. So if you go pistols to try to like out mid-range them, they literally just wipe out your items. Even if you're on aggro, they can just kill your Tekla Pounder, and then you just kind of lose. But until then, I'm still deciding to choose to start 1 induction chamber, or even 2, and just the 2 purifiers. I still think it's probably better, and you just cut the pounders. You just replace the non-block items for other non-block items, but I think these are better in the matchup. But once they bring in Arc Smash, you're going to have a really hard time. And there's only so much you can do. So I would say this is probably the toughest matchup out of this entire spread here. I would say Briar's probably up there, depending on how it goes. 5's also kind of hard, but those are like more 50-50. Rhinar, I think, is just like more unfavorable for you. Like, probably like it won't feel as bad as it would like when, you know, Fi high rolls you, but it's a very tough matchup. I would just try to punish them when they want to keep cards. I would try to preserve your life total early so they can't just like quad intimidate you and just wipe you out late game. I would be careful with Erase Phase, Command and Conquer, and Pummel. Be aware when you're punished if they do have pummel, and just like play around it accordingly. That's pretty much it. And finally, we have Viserai. Viserai has, I feel like, gotten a little bit weaker since the more recent metas. I don't really know if many people are still playing him, mainly just because the loss of Skeletta is pretty bad. Briar seems to be in a better spot, and Fi is more consistent deck. Although Viserai is pretty much just morphed back into like a good value mid-range deck. You can keep really good hands that just have like Mauvrian Skies, Shrill, and a blue pitch. It's a really good 3-card hand. It turns on Rosetta Thorn, but then you can have higher, damage turns with your Swarming Gloom Veils, your Revels, Rune Flash, and you can have more like grindy games where you can set stuff up with like Breathe the Runes into like 9th Blade of the Oath. So the deck is still fine. It's still a very good deck. It's very strong. It can fatigue you if it wants. It has very high blocking capabilities, more than Briar because of running Spellbound Creepers. So we're talking 3 block on arms, 4, 5, 6, 7 life on armor, and most of the Runeblade block for 3 for some reason. I don't know why they made this class so good, but they did. But lots of 3 blocks, so they can fatigue you if they want. They're also on sync below and things like that. These are just natural things for Guardian that you're getting caught in the crossfire of. So I would just start Induction Chamber and you should be okay. You're probably going to play a more mid-range game with them. I wouldn't just try to like power through and keep 5-card hands every turn just to deal damage. They're going to present really good on hits normally with Mauvrian Skies. If you let Mauvrian Skies hit, then you're falling behind in value, so you're going to need to be blocking proactively sometimes. But as long as you're doing that and you're keeping track of what's going on and they don't high roll you too hard, you're probably okay. I would say it's closer to a 50-50, maybe like 55, 45, maybe a little bit in the Viserai's favor. Runeblade's always been a very tough matchup for Dash. Although you do have Pulse Wave Harpoon, so maybe it actually is flipped. Maybe you are a little more favored because of the addition of Pulse Wave. If you can rip their Go Again card, so like if they want to keep a hand that's just Mauve Skies, Shrill, and a blue pitch, and they've already blocked at their 1 card, because you're coming in with Pulse Wave on Chain Link 3, you either take their Go Again, you take the Mauvrian Skies and they just can't give the Shrill Go Again. You take the Shrill and then they just have a hand that doesn't do anything, or you take the blue pitch and they also have a hand that doesn't do anything. So you can just invalidate a lot of their strategies with Pulse Wave, but if you don't draw Pulse Wave, then it's going to be a much tougher matchup. So that's it for this video. It was pretty long. I'm just trying to be a little bit more in-depth, and I always like showing some of the current tournament lists just so people can understand the card pool and how I'm like looking at the decks, rather than just going off of like pure memory and not knowing what more recent inclusions are. But hopefully this was helpful. Good luck in the upcoming Pro Quest season. Thank you for watching.